the American LLC that is US-LLC, or would the Georgian Small Business be better? In this video, you'll find out which business structure is better suited for your company. Hello and welcome. My name is Florian Wilk and I am the Managing Director of CMC in Cyprus, Georgia, Madeira, and several other locations. And in today's video, we'll be looking at the differences between the US-LLC and the Georgian Small Business. There are, in fact, a great many providers who offer and promote the US-LLC as a business model. And in many situations, that also makes a lot of sense. But what isn't so well known, even though it's actually a very, very interesting legal framework, is the Georgian Small Business. So just a quick explanation. What is actually the difference? What is it really all about? To break it down to the essentials. In most cases, the US-LLC is considered a partnership when comparing legal types. And you can certainly, as an individual, you can establish such a partnership, such a US-LLC. For example, you set up an LLC in Nevada and are a single member, meaning you are the sole member, the sole partner in this partnership. And then we have the situation where the LLC opens a business account, often with a fintech in Europe or also with an American bank. But this is only possible if you go there in person. And then the business is conducted through this LLC. And supposedly this is then tax-free. Now the situation is as follows. The LLC is transparent. Taxation does not take place at the level of the LLC because in the standard case I'm talking about, you are not doing any business. The LLC, or rather, in the USA, you are not doing business with the USA or with any US customers. That's the correct way to put it. But taxation does take place at the personal level. And if you, as Max Musterman, are a partner, then taxation takes place at your level, namely Max Musterman. So you have to declare these earnings on your personal income tax. And depending on your country of residence, this can, of course, become quite expensive and result in a relatively high tax burden. And then it becomes crucial, where is my tax residence? Am I in a high-tax country? Is there perhaps a country where only the territorial principle applies? That means foreign income is then tax-free. But even there, the requirements always need to be checked, of course. You can't make such generalizations. It's always a case-by-case assessment. Or do I perhaps have a country where I'm even completely exempt from income tax? That also exists, of course. But the trend in recent years has actually been that many countries are saying, we also want to tax foreign income, at least if the activity is carried out domestically, because then it's not purely foreign income. So there is a lot of leeway, a lot of room for interpretation, and it's not always to the advantage of the taxpayer. So if you're a perpetual traveler, then things might look a bit different. Then you have the advantage that possibly no country feels responsible for you, and then you might be able to get by quite well with a US LLC. Of course, you always have to be a bit careful with the extended limited tax liability from a German perspective, because with a US LLC, you generally don't have a permanent establishment. And there are, I don't want to go too far into detail now, but there are definitely some things you need to watch out for. The devil is really in the details here. And just because it works well for 4 or 5 business partners doesn't mean it's legal or that it will work for you. It's even worse if it works for 3 or 4 years. And then at some point in the future, the tax authorities come after you and say, wait a minute, here we need to retroactively look at the last 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years. They question the entire model and want to tax you retroactively. That can, of course, be existentially threatening and is truly a total financial disaster if all of a sudden you have to pay an additional 30, 35, 40, even 48% income tax for the past 7 years or so. That's why it's so important to deal with these issues and to critically question what fits for me, for my very specific situation. And in this case, with small business, by comparison, the small business in Georgia is a sole proprietorship. It's not a partnership, it's not transparent, it's a sole proprietorship that is registered locally in Georgia. And this status means small business that I up to 500,000 lari, which is about 170,000 euros, I pay 1% tax on the revenue up to that amount. Not on the profit, on the revenue. That means 1,700 euros in taxes on 170,000 euros in revenue. And of course, that's negligible, very low. I don't need any elaborate accounting. I keep my sales invoices, meaning my outgoing invoices, because I'm taxed on the revenue. I can actually skip keeping expense receipts since I can't claim those anyway. So that's not bad either. You save yourself a bit of effort in accounting. Accordingly, we also offer accounting services at a very affordable price for your small business in Georgia. By the way, we support both scenarios, whether it's a US-LLC or a small business in Georgia. I'm completely open to any outcome. I just want you to think about what's best for you and your project, what fits best, and that maybe together we come to the same conclusion. Namely that the US-LLC, the small business, or perhaps an entirely different legal structure is optimal for your project. Yes, so what fits your setup? Here's the difference. Small business. It's a sole proprietorship. You can also get a tax residency certificate for this sole proprietorship. Yes, that's a big difference compared to the US-LLC because the LLC is specifically not resident. Although it is registered in the US, it has absolutely no substance on site and is therefore only transparent. So that's a very, very big difference in that regard. Of course, it also depends on the industry. If you're in e-commerce, then the small business in Georgia won't be right for you, that's clear, because the margins are simply too low. And the revenues quickly reach the high 6 or 7 figure range, so we're immediately out of the small business category. Usually that's when you leave the small business sector. So in terms of taxes, I think the main points I wanted to make have come across. On a personal level, with the establishment of the LLC and also with the comprehensive setup of the small business. Also on a personal level, but specifically with a 1% allocation on the total revenue generated. Here too, it's of course important in Georgia. If your place of residence is actually, let's say, in France, and if you use the small business scheme in Georgia, then of course in France you have to pay the difference with the local income tax. So it only makes sense if you really are a traveler, a perpetual traveler, or if you have your residence in certain countries. With the territorial principle, it doesn't work in every situation. So then another important aspect is stability. And I think, in fact, both are very, very stable countries. That might surprise you now. Certainly the USA, no one would say it's not stable. I think we can all agree on that. But Georgia is also extremely stable in terms of taxation because it's written into the constitution that if the legislature wants to introduce new taxes or increase existing ones, a referendum is required, a public vote. And of course, that's relatively unlikely, yes. And that simply makes Georgia a very, very stable location in terms of taxes. Politically, of course, that's a different story. Sure, the country is a bit torn back and forth between East and West, clearly. But as an entrepreneur, that really shouldn't concern you too much, I think, because the tax advantages are there regardless of whether the region is currently leaning more pro-Russian, pro-American, or European, so to speak. When it comes to legal certainty, you have the big advantage. I've already hinted at it, and this is the next important point. Legal certainty, that in Georgia, you have the major benefit of being able to apply for a tax residency certificate. You have the big advantage that there are double taxation agreements, of course, with the most important countries. You usually have this with the USA as well, at least in most cases. It depends on which countries you are active in or reside in. I think you have a certain level of legal certainty in both locations. But perhaps the USA offers a bit more. It might be an even more legally secure location than Georgia, but it also depends on what expectations I have or which area I'm referring to. Otherwise, a very important point, process and costs. To conclude on the process, you can set up a US LLC entirely remotely, meaning completely online, if you will. Basically from your office or even your living room. Of course, that's extremely convenient, and it can also be done in just a few business days. So it has to be said, things work very, very well in the US and are extremely straightforward. And also in terms of costs, you're usually looking at around 2,000 euros for such a US LLC. That's very, very fair. In Georgia, it's a bit more complicated. You can either take care of things in person, which means you would have to travel to Georgia yourself. Of course, you could do that in the US as well too. Or you would need to have a power of attorney notarized and then apostilled along with a copy of your passport. And then you send us the documents to Tbilisi. Usually clients go to a notary once, have this power of attorney notarized, apostilled, and then send it to us in Tbilisi. And we take care of everything else on site. And in terms of cost, we're actually a little bit cheaper in Georgia than in the USA. But it always depends on exactly what I need. Whether I need a tax residency certificate or if I need a bank, for example. That is actually a problem in the USA. It doesn't have to be, but at the very least, you have to travel there. In Georgia, we can open the account. It's a personal account, but you can use it for business purposes since you're a sole proprietor. So in a sense, you are then, it's your business, so you can definitely use your personal account for business. You can use it for that purpose. And we can take care of opening the account at the same time, so to speak. So you get a second power of attorney if you want for opening the account. And then we do it all in one go, so to speak. We set up the sole proprietorship, apply for small business status, and open the account. And that works very, very well, even without having to travel there. And that brings me to the conclusion where I would say, as a summary, both setups are definitely interesting. There are many cases where neither option is suitable, where a corporation, a classic limited company, is simply the better way, because we need substance, because we need a VAT number, and so on and so forth. And also because there may be certain liability issues that need to be clarified. So in many cases, a corporation makes a lot of sense. But if I have to choose or compare between the US-LLC and the Georgian Small Business, then my conclusion would be, unfortunately, there are many cases where the US-LLC is not used correctly, is founded under the wrong assumptions or with incorrect knowledge, and where people really expose themselves to massive risks. And with a small business, I have the advantage of stability. In Georgia, with the 1%, so I do pay taxes, but I also have a tax residency certificate, I have proof of taxation. And those are, of course, clear-cut advantages that I just don't see with the US-LLC. And I think some people would do well having to reconsider whether the US-LLC is really the right choice in the long term or not. That a small business in Georgia actually makes much more sense, especially because, of course, European banks also exchange information without any problem. So just relying on the fact that no information will be exchanged because the USA does not participate in automatic information exchange, I think that's very naive. So I can only advise against thinking or approaching it that way, because sooner or later that will lead to problems. So thank you very, very much for your attention. Please take advantage of the opportunity for a free consultation. This is not a sales pitch. We would be happy to advise you. You can find the link below the video. Feel free to register without obligation. And I wish you all the best with your project. Thank you for your attention and see you very, very soon.